welcome everyone. This is super exciting to be here at our first of a series of nonviolence speaker series, Living the Principles of Nonviolence. Welcome to the space. Excited to have you. A little nervous to start. We're going to just say welcome to the audience that's watching online, and then I'm going to forget you're there so that I can concentrate here and not be so nervous. My name is Julie Gallegos. I'm the Associate Executive Director at Habitat for Humanity right here in Longmont, in the St. Vrain Valley. I think you probably know Habitat from the fact that we build homes. We build homes here and internationally in 70 different countries. But what you might not know is Habitat's mission is really about bringing people together to build hope and community as well. So that is equally important, and that is why we are here today. So we are going to have this speaker series. This is the first of 6 over 12 weeks because it's every other Tuesday night. And we're here to talk about the principles of nonviolence, which can be boiled down into courage, which you're here for tonight, friendship and understanding, justice, transformation, love, and hope. And I'll get into those a little bit more. What are those about? The principles of nonviolence that I just read through are really about building the beloved community. And what is the beloved community? Beloved community is a term that was popularized by Dr. Martin Luther King, and his wife and living civil rights legend, Coretta Scott King, is quoted in the Jewish Post saying, "My husband frequently used the term the beloved community to describe the kind of society in which every person was valued and where all conflicts could be reconciled in a spirit of goodwill and mutual benefit. We are struggling to make America a beloved community where all of us can live together in a climate of understanding, cooperation, unity. We have to do a lot more consciousness raising to build the great coalition of all races and cultures needed to make his dream a reality. We must work together with energetic determination to build new bridges of understanding, trust, cooperation, and goodwill between our communities." So that's what we're here tonight. We are here to talk about the beloved community. You all have committed your time to learning these principles and learning with us tonight, and then applying those in building the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about. I represent Habitat for Humanity. We are here organizing, but we are also grateful to our partner with Central Presbyterian Church, who has helped to put this on. And then we have a lot of really great people who are endorsing this as well, organizations. The Executive Committee from African American Cultural Events, Longmont Multicultural Action Committee, El Comité, Bright Collaborative, the Center for African American and African Studies of CU Boulder, I Have a Dream Foundation of Boulder County, the Heart of Longmont, Nepali Jatra, Asian Pacific Association of Longmont, and the Center for People with Disabilities. So thank you to all of them and all of those organizations for supporting and helping to promote this. The principles, or the series we'll be talking through all of the principles in this series, and we'll be doing that with this live studio audience. We also are streaming this, and we also have it on Channel 8, and it will also be recorded. So if you miss one, you can't come every single other Tuesday night. You can always watch this at your own convenience after the fact as well. If you are watching online and you would like to be in the studio audience the next time, if you go to Eventbrite and look for Nonviolence in Longmont, you can get a seat, although I tell you to do it quickly because they are filling up fast. We are going to have question and answer time after this. So luckily, if you're here in the audience and you have a question, you can do it. We're going to try to figure out how to also be getting those questions for people online. So if you are online, you can put those in the comment, and we're going to attempt to track those as well. So we'll see how much we can get through that. So I want to dive into the first principle, and our first principle is courage. And courage, the principle itself is nonviolence. Living nonviolence is a courageous act. This is important because it has to be the first thing. It has to be the first so we can do all of the other principles and live all the other principles of nonviolence. Because it takes courage to step out and say, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the work in the face of fear, in the face of rejection, in the face of loss. I'm going to still step out because I'm going to say that what is happening is not okay, and I'm going to have the courage to do something else. I'm going to have the courage to stand up in front of this audience in live stream about this. So this is my courage today to be here with you. But it also takes courage to go against popular beliefs or cultural norms or unjust laws. And that's what it's all about, is standing up to say it's not okay, and I'm going to go do something about that. Courage is not, Dr. Martin Luther King was a pastor, and it is a Christian principle, but it's not just found in Christianity. The principles of nonviolence can be found in all the world's religions, Buddhism and Judaism and Islam. They're universal, which is a wonderful way to unite all of us, knowing that these principles are universal in their appeal and their value. So let's talk about one thing. I wanted to talk about an example from the civil rights movement, the photo in the back here. When I think about courage from the civil rights movement, my first thought is of the Greensboro Four. So in the 1950s and before, if you walked into a restaurant in the South, there was a sign for where you could sit, depending on the color of your skin. And I'm going to say restaurant because it was lunch counters, and we don't have those anymore. I don't even know what that meant. But the restaurants, and we think of that today. Can you imagine walking into a restaurant and being told where to sit? Like, this is not a cultural norm anymore. But at the time it was. It was a cultural norm. It was a law. It was a popular belief. This is where you sat. This is how it worked. And these gentlemen here from the Greensboro Four, they said, this is not okay. What is this law, this belief, this norm? It's not okay. And we're going to do something about it. And so they did sit in. And they were the first to start the sit-ins at the lunch counters in February 1st of 1960. So 66 years later and 2 days, we are talking about this still. But it took a lot of courage for them. And they didn't also just do this spontaneously. This was planned. They knew what they were getting into. They knew that by sitting and at this lunch counter, that one, they would be intimidated, harassed, but two, they were probably going to go to jail because this was a law and they were doing something to break the law. But by them sitting there and then all the other students and young people who did that, we can say a restaurant being segregated by your color of your skin, that just seems completely abnormal right now. But it was normal at the time. So that is my example for the civil rights. But that leads me to bringing it to the current time. And this is where our speaker series is going to bring those principles of nonviolence that motivated and moved the civil rights into what we're talking about today. So, Angel Sanchez is our first speaker to talk about courage. Angel is the social equity coordinator at the City of Longmont. So by the very definition of his job, he is courageously saying what is equitable in the City of Longmont to the 2,000 people that work for the City of Longmont and run our city. So just by his very job, but also by his character and by who he is and how he has shaped his life in doing courageous acts to stand up for things. So Angel was born in Tucson, but he now calls Longmont home. Attended the University of Arizona and Colorado University, has a degree in English literature and ethnic studies. And he's worked in our Vrain Valley School District Front Range Community College, University of Colorado, and now at the City of Longmont. And he has done work with advocacy and civic engagement for our youth, and has shown up in being a voice for the Latina communities and immigrant communities. So please welcome Gabriel Sanchez.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to take a quick drink because my mouth is dry, right? She beat me to the punch on courage. I'm like, let's start with the fact that I'm sitting here in front of you all right now. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to, have this conversation with you all and share a little bit about my experiences as they relate to courage, and really what I have seen evolve in my understanding of it, and where I believe it posits us in this moment in time as a necessity, right? It's really a need to find the ability to say, I can do more, I am more, and with that responsibility and that privilege and that power, I will do more. And so that's really important. And so when I was thinking about this and thinking about courage, I kept thinking about what do I want to talk about? What do I want to say? And the only thing that kept coming back to me is like, tell them that your heart's beating fast inside of your chest right now, right? But nothing else was coming, and I'm like, why? And I realized because I was trying to force it. I was trying to find a definition of courage that was given to me instead of created by myself. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, because so much of what we navigate in our world is so unique to ourselves, right? In fact, every single thing we navigate as one individual in this world is unique to ourselves. But we are often grouped together, right, for a variety of different reasons, whatever those might be. So when I started thinking about courage, I started thinking about, well, how did you learn those things? How do you know that? Where did you find the opportunity and ability to understand those differences, to accept those differences? And that was a very important moment, because in that moment I realized your definition has changed over time. And that's important, because we can't always just have a stagnant approach and where we expect different results by doing the same thing. And so sometimes even the courage that we have, even the courage that we draw, right, can be drawn from different sources for different reasons and in a variety of different ways. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, about where does courage really come from? Where is it born from for us, right? How do we express it? For some, it is a necessity, right, more than a decision. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that as well. But obviously, we're celebrating the principles of nonviolence of Dr. King. And I just want to also acknowledge that we are also celebrating the very beautiful Black History Month right here in February. And so I can't express enough how grateful I am for this opportunity to share this with you all. So, thinking about Dr. King and his philosophies and his teachings, and I think one of the things that really gets lost often, gets misconstrued, is what his true view of nonviolence encompassed. And so a lot of times when you hear nonviolence, it's equated to very often demonstration, right? Resistance. But nonviolence in Dr. King's vision wasn't just a demonstration, it was a way of life. It was a purpose. It was a guiding principle that you established your foundation on and pursued justice for every single person that you came across that needed it, that was impacted by it. Even further, the gentleman had the courage to also say, you, my oppressor, are also part of that community that I wish to see built, that I wish to see, liberated from pain, from suffering. And it took courage in that time for him to even approach that principle in that way. And we know by examining history how much violence, right, how much torment was experienced by people of color during those times. And so for an individual to look at the oppressor who was directing that type of action and activity towards him and say, despite it all, I wish to share a space of love with you. That was truly courageous. And that is truly what helped beset my understanding and my goal of being courageous. Because once upon a time, that wasn't the case. So I want to talk to you a little bit. I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story and really how courage came to be for me. Growing up in a Latino household, as a young kid, I grew up around a lot of men with very deeply entrenched masculine values. Unfortunate masculine values, so let's call it what it is. For example, a 3-year-old kid falls and skins his knee, and in Spanish they say hombre, be a man. Like, I'm 3 years old, all right? I'm trying to process being a child, let alone figuring out how to be a man. I'm 42. If anybody's got it figured out, come meet me in the lobby afterwards, because we're still trying to learn what that even means, right? And so it was this embedded understanding that courage and bravery were this machismo pride, right? This badge of honor that you wore and that you had to show people, right? I remember some friends that I have and where bullying, right, came into their lives. And it was this idea that I needed to show, right, this sense of importance by belittling somebody else. And this was, unfortunately, a lived reality in that culture. Now, I don't fault my father, right? My father is an amazing man. I love him. But he was raised very differently. But then he sacrificed and went through a lot for me to have the opportunity to sit in this chair today and share this story with you. And I'm truly, truly grateful because I'll never understand that journey. I've never been an undocumented immigrant, even though I've been detained twice because apparently I fit the description, right? And so I'll never understand that, but what I will always appreciate and what I always will honor is his willingness to budge and understand the way this generation, the way my son is growing up and understanding the world is different than not only the way I've understood it, but the way I've been delivering it to him. And so for my father, this very rigid man who held strongly and firmly to his beliefs and his values, knew he had to crack. He had to crack that shield. If I want to maintain my relationship with my son, I can no longer continue to inundate him with these ideas of this is the way a man is supposed to be. And in that, I saw a softening in him. Right? And not a softening of, oh, he wasn't a proud man or this anymore. No, it was an understanding, a reflection, a self-reflection that he was never really taught to do, that was never exposed to him. You don't share your emotions as a Latino male. You bottle them down and you'll figure it out later, right? But that wasn't the case. And so when I saw that from him, it gave me even more hope and opportunity to keep going forward and say, I'm headed in the right direction. I remember when I was a kid, I was afraid to do anything. My cousins, they would go out into the desert and explore and wouldn't come back until the sun set and the street lights came on. And I wouldn't go because I was afraid. Of what? I didn't even know yet. I just knew I was afraid. One day, one uncle of mine pulls me to the side and says, hey, dude, you gotta go hang out with them. He's like, be like Batman. I'm like, Batman? So do you know what Batman's afraid of? I said, I don't know, the Joker? He said, no, he's afraid of bats. And he became one. You have to become the things you're afraid of, he said to me. Go do what you're afraid of, and that thing's not gonna be scary anymore. Maybe not in those words, there's some more colorful language in there, but you get the gist of it. And for whatever reason, that conversation in that moment just penetrated me. And I understood that in order to not be fearful, I needed to conquer fear itself. I needed to go do the thing that I was afraid of. And I did as a kid. I remember I went to my local swimming pool and dove off the diving board. And I dog paddled for my life to get to the edge. And when I did, I was panting. I looked up, the lifeguard says, don't ever do that again. We're on the same page, no worries. Yeah. But I was giving myself an opportunity to take risks, right? And as I grew older, those risks started to become misconstrued by this will and desire to be, popular, to fit in, to a culture that at the time in my life and in the community that I was raised in was riddled by gangs, drugs, and violence. And so if you wanted to fit in, you played the part. And so I took this idea of courage facing fear and created fear out of conditions that I never had to confront in the first place, because I was putting myself in positions that were putting me in danger. And I thought that those moments in time were showing me what courage truly was. And boy, was I wrong, right? It took a lot of work and a lot of experience for me to realize the way you're headed is not the right way. And so
I got to community college and I said, you know what, I'm going to get involved in an issue that matters to me. My mom and dad were both undocumented immigrants once upon a time. I'm going to start looking into immigration as a cause. And boy, was my conception of courage flipped on its head. You see, I always believed in the literal definition of courage, in that it was the will to show strength, right, in the face of adversity, in the face of pain, in the face of fear, right? This willingness to stand up and, give it the lion's roar, right? But it wasn't. That wasn't it. I was very, very confused, right? Because I was trying to express something that I wasn't or didn't really want to be, as this misconstrued idea of what courage truly is. And I realized, and this was one of the hardest things to do in my life, that in order to really live up to a definition of courage, a nonviolent definition of courage, I had to walk away. And in that environment, under those circumstances, walking away is not always easy, right? It was a conscious decision that you had to make. And I did. And I opened up books and started to learn and started to explore and started to discover realities and cultures that aren't mine, right? Because of my view was so narrow and really was so informed by so many things, but culturally I hadn't had the experience to really understand, how do others live? How do others feel? And more importantly, how are others suffering? And so I started to investigate and learn. And I realized in that moment, when I was sitting in a library reading a book, right, about Dr. King's history and this fascinating relationship, complex relationship with Malcolm X, right? I knew in that moment that what I was doing in that library was courageous. For this reason, coming from a background of over 60-some cousins. My mom was one of 13 kids, right? So we had a big family, and I'm one of 5 out of those 60 that made it to college. And in that culture, instead of this celebration and this propping up, there was this belittlement and knocking down of you because you made it, right? You made it to this next peg that I'm not at, and I probably don't believe I can reach. Well, now I got to start belittling you so I can feel better about myself. And then I started having those conversations with my family, that what you're doing right now is knocking yourself down, right? And so how do you find the courage to say, everything that I've done up to this point needs to change and shift? And change is scary. Change is terrifying. But that ability and that willingness to change, that truly was courageous, right? And I saw some of my cousins do it. One of them ended up heading out to the military and served President Barack Obama as his security detail, right? And that was amazing. And he'd come home like it was nothing. And me, I was like, dude, you're over there watching Obama golf. He doesn't let you golf, but you're watching him golf, right? And he didn't golf as often, I promise, right? We remember, yeah, we know. But it was this idea that our realities that had been formed for us in so many ways, by our culture, by our families, by our education or lack of an education that mirrored our lived reality, the color of our skin, right? The accents in our language, right? All these things that created this perfect storm to create this narrow path that you never believed you could break out of. And to be able to say, right, I took the path less followed, was courageous, because you didn't know what you were going to find on the other side. We didn't have those mentors. None of my family, I'm first gen, none of my family had gone to college so they can explain to me, here's what it's like. I remember I went to college, my dad didn't know what to do, and without money, he went and bought me a computer that I didn't need. And I never had a computer, but now I had a computer that I didn't need, and I was just so touched by it, because that was his understanding of what he needed to do as a dad in that moment. And it was a beautiful thing. But that really started to change all my perception, so that when I got into a higher learning institution, which is really important for us to also acknowledge, right, that in itself for so many people is a courageous act, because higher learning institutions, unfortunately, historically have disenfranchised people of color, right? And so going into an environment that doesn't reflect you, doesn't reflect your beliefs, your values, your upbringing, your culture, not only does it not reflect it, but in so many instances exists in spite of it. And to walk into that space at the University of Colorado Boulder, which, my gosh, was a culture shock for me, right? I grew up in the south side of Tucson. They used to call it Little Mexico, Little Mexico, because, right, it was our music, our language, everybody looked like me. And then I went to Pearl Street one day and I was like, this is different. This is different, right? But I got an opportunity to be a student there as an adult, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't think I'd have survived here had I walked in through these doors when I was 18 years old. Because I hadn't had the lived experience. I hadn't had the self-reflection that needed to happen, that deep, personal, and often painful self-reflection that really brought me out of that shell to say, hey, you can be different. Despite what anything or anyone around you says, ultimately you can be different. And that change took a lot of courage. Moving to this city and staying here, raising a family, took a lot of courage, right? And these are all privileges that I had. And so then I got involved with immigrant rights. And then I realized courage isn't always an act of will. Sadly and unfortunately, we have seen conditions created in this world that have caused courage to be an act of necessity, an act of sacrifice. To live courageously in a moment where you didn't ask to, but because of your existence and the circumstances that have been created around you, you're forced to. I'll give you an example. I will never know the fear of driving to a grocery store to buy food for my children. I'll never know that fear. And undocumented immigrants who showed up to meetings, who went to the Capitol to advocate, right? Who got up and were the loudest in the room sometimes, don't have a choice. They have to. They are forced to be courageous for the love of their families, for the need of their families. And so as we think about courage, it's so extremely important for us to recall and remember that there are nuances to this reality, to what that experience truly is, what it truly means, what it costs somebody to live up to that definition. And it's so important for us to see that in each other and acknowledge it in each other so that we don't expect that the next person I get to meet is going to display their courage in the same way that I've been taught or that I believe is right. But I can share my conception of courage or where that was born from, and maybe it inspires somebody, maybe it motivates somebody. I can tell you that people's courage and my opportunity and ability to witness it is what helped mine evolve. Watching my mom holding her head in her hands at the kitchen table late at night, trying to figure out where am I going to find another dollar for these bills. My mom and my aunt conspiring to find a way to help their undocumented friend so she can continue to help cleaning houses to provide for her family. Endless rows of undocumented immigrants that walked through my backyard in the summers in Tucson, Arizona, who had just made over a 380-mile trek through absolute despair and almost certain death for a better opportunity. The courage to make that trek because you had to. Not as just an act of sheer will, but an act of need. And so when I think of courage, I always constantly remind myself that there's no one definition. But if we can lean into courage in the way that Dr. King did and say, this isn't just an act that comes up in the presence of fear. This is an absolute way of life, a way to live, a way to approach, a way to be honest, a way to encourage, right? And quite frankly, a way to find strength. We've seen, even in nonviolent action recently, people lose their lives. And it's a tragic thing. And let's remind ourselves that at a time when these conceptions of nonviolence were really being born through the civil rights movement, that in those moments, the violence was far greater and more regular, right? It happened so consistently and constantly that you knew going into that's what you needed to expect. And so the shock of what we witnessed recently was because we've been removed from that. That's our privilege. That our opportunity and our ability to go out there and protest against what we see is wrong, to go out there and fight for social justice, our path has been made far easier. It doesn't mean it's easy, doesn't mean it's not hard, but it's been made easier by individuals who were courageous enough to adopt these concepts of freedom in the face of absolute adversity and to say, I wish to apply these concepts of freedom to absolutely every single being that I encounter and that I will share space with. And that is a phenomenal thing to think of. So as we go out there and we pursue social justice for our marginalized communities, for our families, for ourselves, that we remember that, right? Somebody courageously sacrificed themselves once upon a time without knowing that you one day would pick up the mantle and carry it on. But somebody did that out of necessity. And we owe it to ourselves and to all those people who paved that road for us to ensure that not only do we accept this as a responsibility, a privilege and an opportunity, but as an act of sheer will and, quite frankly, an act of necessity. Because that is what this calls for. These moments of despair for anybody, anywhere, calls for courage. And it calls for us to examine their courage, right? And highlight it for them. And to know that you are the owner of your own journey. And we are here but to be guides whenever you need us, right? And for a lot of us, it takes courage even to say, I need help. And so we have an amazing opportunity. I want to share a little bit with you about something that Dr. King wrote, because I think this is really, really important. But there's this quote that kept popping up in my head, and I kept thinking about it. I was watching a clip from the Grammys, and then it popped up again, and I was like, that's a sign. I don't know how many of you are hip to Bad Bunny's music, but the gentleman made history by winning a Grammy, and the first all Spanish in that category, which is pretty phenomenal in itself when you think about it. But Ricky Martin, another Latin artist, wrote him a letter, and in that letter he said, "Courage is where fear and hope coexist." And if we can understand that hope is really what courage is born out of, then fear won't overtake it. But when those two things come face to face, courage is what is created, and courage is the opportunity. Because you could very easily say, when you come to that pass, this is not for me. And yet at the end of the day, no matter what happens to one single person, it happens to all of us collectively. So when we think about that, just know that it's not just our fear. It's not just our hope, but it's the fears of the people we live next door to, It's the hope of the people that walk in and out of our homes every day, It's the people that we work with, the people that we see in our communities holding up a piece of cardboard asking you for change because they're down on their luck. Whatever it might be, Whenever that convergence of fear and hope are present, that's where courage can be born. And it's on us to make that decision. And I think for individuals who understand that, there's an inherent risk, to being courageous in the face of adversity in the way that we've seen recently, and absolutely in the way that Dr. King and all the leaders of the civil rights movement, experienced it. And he had another line that really hit me, and it said, "I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land." And those are words from an individual who knew I might not see that day because of the things that I'm saying and because the things that I'm doing are not popular, but they're absolutely necessary. And his faith in that never wavered. And not only because he was a student of Christianity and religion, but because that's where his heart was, And that's what drew people to. Powerful voice, oh my gosh, like poetry in motion. But it was that heart, that understanding. And quite frankly, it's important to also acknowledge that that's also what drove some people away. And so when, brings me back to when we find that opportunity, do we become part of the solution, part of the support, or do we just walk away? That's a challenge, That's a challenge for every single one of you, every single one of us to make for ourselves. And it may be different from instance to instance, You take me to watch a scary movie, I might feel different about that than if you take me to No King's March, where I'll be far more comfortable, With or without popcorn. I want to share with you this, and then I'll take a break here. Maybe we could do some questions. This is from The Only Road to Freedom by Dr. King, May 4th, 1966. This is my guy right here, Leo, my son, born May 4th, 2015. There are many people who very honestly raise the question of self-defense. This must be placed in perspective. It goes without saying that people will protect their homes. This is a right guaranteed by the Constitution and respected even in the worst areas of the South. But the mere protection of one's home and person against assault by lawless night riders does not provide any positive approach to the fears and conditions which produce violence. In a nonviolent demonstration, self-defense must be approached from quite another perspective. One must remember that the cause of the demonstration is some exploration or form of oppression that has made it necessary for men, and I will add people, women of courage and goodwill, to demonstrate against evil. And I'll leave you with this. I must continue by faith, or it is too great a burden to bear, and violence, even in self-defense, creates more problems than it solves. Only a refusal to hate or kill or to put an end to the chain of violence in the world and lead us toward a community where people can live together without fear will we realize this. Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls as well as a quantitative change in our lives. And so, as you set forth on your journey, wherever it may take you, remember that in so many instances in life, we're going to have the opportunity to be courageous. And in the instances when we're not, we can find the opportunities instead of waiting for them to come to us. Especially when we think about how many people are suffering and how much privilege and opportunity we hold to be a part of their solution. So thank you so much for listening to me speak tonight. I really appreciate you all coming here. And happy to answer some questions if we have any. Dr. Pepper. Thank you.
We have some questions from the audience, and somebody's going to maybe be tracking online. But do we have any? Crystal's raising her hand back there. No questions.
No
yet.
questions
I see one
yet.
back there.
I'll ask a question. Thanks for the talk and just sharing some about your personal life.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, as your content. I'm wondering about our relationship with convenience in this current state. I'm thinking about Dr. King's study with Gandhi, who got people to stop buying something en masse and start collecting their salt and not buying it. And the bus boycott was a year of highly coordinated efforts to not use the bus for a year. And I'm very concerned at how systemic our consumption is. And I'm wondering if you had an ask for society to put down a convenience that you see would have the biggest benefit on reaching this beloved community, what you would say we could do.
Thank you so much for sharing. May I ask your name?
I'm Erica.
Erica, thank you so much for being here and for that question. And listen, before we go on, I should have said this at the forefront. I'm no expert in this subject, right? I'm merely sharing with you my experiences and what I believe could support, right, our advancement of social justice. But, and thinking about that question, you're absolutely right. And it's an interesting thing when you think about, like, to give you an example, the LA blowouts of the 60s, and where students walked out of their high schools, right, for weeks, right, if not longer, to say we're not being given equal access to education. We're not asking for special things, we're asking for access to education, right? I think about living in Tucson, Arizona, and the ban on ethnic studies at the Tucson Unified School District, excuse me. And this very beautiful demonstration that happened, right? High school students walked out of their school, community met them at a park, and organically just marched right down the streets, and people came and joined from everywhere. It was beautiful, and it was one day. And the next day on the news, the story was, protesters litter grounds. That was the story the news went with, right? And I remember thinking in that moment, where do we go from here? What now? That was so beautiful, and yet that feeling has not been prolonged. And there's been this very intentional attack to redirect the attention from what were we there for in the first place, to say, right, look at what they've done. And so when I think about that, I often ask myself is, how do we recapture that understanding and willingness to sacrifice, right? And to hold steady and prolong that. And that's a difficult thing to do, right? Because we've become such a consumer society and we're constantly bombarded, right, with consumerism, right? That sometimes we start to believe ourselves, this is necessity, right? I don't need that Kit Kat bar when I go to Safeway, but something in my brain told me I do, right? And I know that's a silly example, but you get the gist of it. Is that we have developed this recognition of convenience to the point that it inhibits our ability to fully recognize how resourceful of a human being am I. And I say that for this reason. My grandfather, we had a desk, and it broke. And he's like, and we're gonna throw it away. He's like, that's perfectly good wood. I'm like, what are you gonna do with it? And he made a shoebox, a real nice looking shoebox, right? So you come and we put our shoes there, and then that thing over time it broke. So we were gonna throw it out. I said, no. Give the scraps to your tata, as we call my grandfather. Give your scraps to your tata. All right. So I took them to him, and he made my sister a very pretty jewelry box. And I'm like, dude, right? We recycled, we shared, right? I can't even recall the last time one of my neighbors asked me for a cup of sugar. Maybe to turn the volume down, but not for sugar, right? So you have a point there in that is something that we need to examine and explore with more intention, right? Not just a curiosity to say, what is, right? Why is that the case? But to say, how do we recapture that level and type of resistance so that prolonged impact shows how much we are an integral and important part of this society. I don't know that answers your question fully, but that's the best I can offer right now.
Take your grandfather's example.
Yes, right? Recycle, reuse, and share, right? Oh, you should have seen when I discovered Longmont Free Cycle. Is that still a thing? Longmont Free Cycle, forget it. I was like, okay, we don't need this, but it looks cool, right? Consumerism. Here I am, convincing myself I need more stuff. I need to clean my garage is what I need to do. Thank you for your question. Appreciate it.
Other questions? From the audience, from online? There's a hand in the back. I can't see your face, but.
So here's, I can tell you a great story about a dreamer as well. But we've had just a wonderful contractor, okay? Two different groups of people. And he's Latino and a citizen, but we don't know how many of his workers are undocumented or whatever. And when a lot of this started developing a couple of years ago, we told them we will help if there's any, we didn't interrogate as to the status of any of their workers, but asked, we would be happy to help in any way, help get an immigration lawyer or whatever. What would you recommend talking to somebody? And then we have a next door neighbor whose wife is a Mexican citizen, but is married and has a passport and everything, but is not a U.S. citizen. And we sense there's a lot of fear there. How do we speak to these individuals to develop some courage, to develop that hope that you spoke of?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'm sorry, can you remind me your name?
Miguel.
Miguel, thank you.
I'm Michael.
Michael, thank you. Thank you, Miguel. Yeah, that's, wow. And I don't know that I necessarily have a direct answer for you. And I apologize for that. But I'll say this. One of the things that I had to learn or unlearn was this desire to be a supporter, right? To the point where I felt like I need to stand up and fight for you. And then I started making decisions that I thought, right, were in line with what's needed for you. And that never came from any of the undocumented immigrants that I was working, including my mother and father. And so I recognized early on that it really needed to come from them. Not just an ask for help, but a guidance to what do you need, right? What impacts are you experiencing? How can I leverage my privilege and opportunity on behalf of you? Aside from casting a vote, which I will happily do every time for you. But how do I do that, right? And so what I found myself doing was that instead of approaching folks directly like I'm some kind of superhero and saying, hey, I'm here to help, right? I'm gonna save you. I had to humble myself and say, you can't save anybody. You have to be part of their journey in how they see you fit into it, right? Now that doesn't mean that I didn't take on immigration work independently, right? And some things that we knew we could actually advocate for, right? But ultimately, until the voice of our immigrant community was the one driving my actions or my support of any actions, I wasn't really pursuing social justice for the immigrant community. Now, I know that doesn't answer your question, but I guess what I'm trying to say there is sometimes that help and support may be misconstrued if it's not being expressed directly, right? And so if these individuals have expressed a direct need, I would venture to guess that they've opened up a door for you to provide some resources, right? And say, hey, there's some organizations that you might be interested in taking a look at, right? But I will caution on making the mistake of assumption, right? The mistake of assumption and presuming that somebody may be undocumented if they're not, right? Or they have some type of permission or permission to be here, right? For example, I don't consider any single one of my DACA recipient friends, families, neighbors, whatever it may be, right? I don't consider them not to be undocumented because they've not been given an opportunity to say, I don't have to fear anything. They've been given a pass with an expiration date, right? And so just by thinking about that, right, it's like, okay, who am I making an assumption of that's here undocumented and who actually accepts that definition? That's my definition, not theirs, right? Somebody who has DACA may look at me and be like, I'm not undocumented, I have DACA, right? And that's their personal preference. But I think the biggest thing there is being mindful and careful about, am I making an assumption on somebody's need without direct information from that individual that tells me that that's the case, right? And sometimes patience itself is an act of courage, right? And so I unfortunately don't have a solution for you. I don't know these individuals and I couldn't speak to you to say, here's how you should respond to individuals that you've experienced. But I think if they've opened that door and you have an opportunity to connect them with resources, then that's amazing. So yeah, again, I don't have a full answer to your response, but that's the best I can offer.
Any other questions from the audience? I see another hand in the back. All I see are hands.
Anel, thank you, as usual, inspiring. To use your thing with Batman, a superhero that's human, right? So, much like yourself. What do you do when the crossroads of hope and fear are also then being dragged back by despair? How do you recharge yourself? And I know you can't tell us how to do it for us, but how do you do it? Because I've known you for a long time, and times have not gotten better since I first met you. But you still bring the inspiration, but I also know that you're human and that that's not something that you just live in 100% of the time. How do you recharge yourself?
Thank you, my brother. That's
Good
Mark
question.
Hartman, by the way, one of my bestest friends. I love Mark. Thank you for that question, Mark. I'll pay you your 20 outside for all those nice things you said. And again, I think just like we talked about courage having nuance, right? There's so much nuance, and I think it really just comes down to that recognition. For me, it's recognition. It's like, okay, how much of that despair am I holding, and how much of it do I need to hold, right? And I don't mean to say, oh, I can excuse myself from some of this because I have the privilege not to worry about it, but to say there are others who don't have that, and so I need to take some of that, right? With that understanding and recognition of, I'm only gonna take what you're giving me, what you're asking me to carry, right? So at the end of the day, it's not the load that breaks us, right? It's the way we carry it. And so when somebody can help us carry that, right, that in itself could feel like a relief. So for example, if there's an undocumented family here in Longmont, right, living in this despair of like, I don't even want to walk outside my front door, right? It gives an opportunity for us with privilege to say, what do you need? Let me go get it for you. Where do you need to go? Let me give you a ride there. Whatever it might be, right? And so for me, it's always been not getting stuck in that despair, but recognizing and leveraging the privilege that I have to realize you don't need to be stuck in this. You have an actual opportunity, right? Not without barriers. I'm not going to sit here, right, and just say, oh yeah, I can do whatever I want whenever I want. No, barriers still exist. My skin's still brown, right? But at the end of the day, right, I'm a homeowner, privilege. My kids have all the clothes they need and food, privilege. And so how fair is it for me to internalize so much despair when it doesn't even equal the despair of somebody who may not even realize that's what they're living in, right? And so I have to constantly remind myself of, yeah, you got to take a moment and pause, right? This is heavy stuff, right? Fighting for social justice is heavy, right? We're talking about principles of nonviolence that had to be adopted. Like somebody had to say that out loud one day, right? And so really just thinking about the fact that I have opportunities and I can leverage those opportunities. And when I do take a step back, remembering there are some who can't, right? There's some who just don't have this ability to say, you know what, I'm just going to take a break from this fight, right? Because they might not be home tomorrow, or their kids might not come home, whatever that might be. That's a terror that I'm never going to understand, right? And so when I think about that, I just remind myself, no matter how much despair there might be, my love and commitment for people's ability to live wholly as themselves, right, absent of fear, allows me to overcome that in that moment, whatever that might be. But absolutely, you got to take some breaks, right? Watch a Batman movie, right? Read some comic books, watch some football, soccer. But it's true. We've got to find those self-care spaces, and then how do we create those self-care spaces for the people who don't have them, right? And how do we become a part of their opportunity to just and let the stress just release, even if only for a moment, right? I have a pinched nerve in my neck, and the physical therapist, I'm like, she has me stretch my neck, and she's like, it's just a momentary relief, but oh my gosh, that momentary relief, right? And I know that's extremely different, right? But sometimes just being able to breathe when you're stuck in that despair, oh, that could be a huge, huge difference in how you keep advancing. Yeah.
Talking to people too, community.
Yes, talking to people and community. And look,
Find those people.
I meant to share this as part of my presentation, but sometimes I get going and then I'm tangents. But one of the things that I think is really important is recognizing how people have been given this unique power that has been used, in my personal opinion, in the worst way possible. And that's the opportunity and ability to reach millions of people at any given moment in time, right? Social media, right? It takes courage to be honest and truthful. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, right? And it takes courage to walk away from somebody that you have to recognize is not there for an honest, right, conversation, but it's just there to make you feel bad about what you believe and what they believe is right. And so, when talking to people, be careful with those spaces, right? We were living in a society now where facts are not what people base their reality off of far too often anymore. It's based off of that opinion of that person that I like what they said and how they said it, and so now that's my fact, right? Opinion expressed as fact, and that's dangerous. And so talking to people, talking to community, but be careful putting that out there, right, sometimes, because that community online sometimes can be very unkind. And if you're navigating that place of stress and despair, that could put you in a very deeper hole, where you went looking for some relief and some support, and you ran up against the opposite. So I'll just say, the face-to-face experience, right? And all of you at home too.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm just curious here in Longmont, like where in our community, in our government, like where are some like areas that you see like folks showing courage or you're like excited about or, you know, like part of that beloved movement?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, your name?
Chris.
Chris, thank you so much. Yeah, there's tons of spaces, right? There's a room full of folks here that navigate those spaces on a regular basis, right? My wonderful friend Julie, as you can see, is helping to co-create some of those spaces. And there's some members of a group that I'm a part of, ALMAC, that are really, really, right, expressing that courage. And simply by living into their values and what matters to them, right? We got a group of folks and organizers here who had some complexity with an organization they were navigating, and instead of folding and packing up, they said, no, we're going to carry on what we're doing, and showed courage by saying, we're going to rebrand, and we're going to keep our faith strong and keep moving forward and keep supplying these events that are critical and important, not just for the people that that are mirrored in it, but all the people that need to learn it. And so it's everywhere. I just to point out a couple of names, obviously because we're sharing the space, Habitat for Humanity, ALMAC. But I'll say this, and I'll share this part in that I think one of the interesting things that I discovered working in the space of government, and let me reframe that, doing equity in a space of government, right, is that it felt very contradictory, right? I'm like, wait, this is where it was born, right, and it's where it's evolved and sustained, and yet here we are trying to contradict ourselves in a way, in the best way, because it needs to happen, right? But I'll say, for me, the city's willingness, the council's willingness to adopt equity as a value is courage, especially when you see the villainization of DEI, right, across the country. Went to a national conference, and we're sitting in a room of leaders from different jurisdictions across the U.S. They asked the question, how many of you have had to change job descriptions? Our hands were the only ones that didn't go up. And so to have the courage to say, we're committed to equity, and we're going to continue to be committed to equity, despite this rhetoric that you've created around it, I think is really important. And so when I look at the opportunities that the city offers, right, and these amazing folks that are doing this amazing work out of it, those are the spaces, right? That's the courage that has been inspiring me since I've had this opportunity, but definitely there. And I would say anybody, and you don't have to be a part of an organization, but anybody willing to lend their voice around the issue of immigration right now. As we see, it's a very hot topic, and that doesn't mean it replaces any other hot topics that were still there and are still there. But right, the way we're seeing it play out, anybody that's willing to lend their voice to that, right, that's an act of courage. But there are organizations that you can join and be a part of. And so I'll say that there's this uniqueness to Longmont in that we live, and I'm going to call it for what it is. We live in a pretty sheltered space, right, and in the reality of what a lot of folks are experiencing. And that's the truth of it. And some of that truth lies in the fact that these folks in this room, Julie and so many more out there, also were a part of creating that. Right? And so that's important to acknowledge too. But yeah, it's really just saying, where are people suffering, right? And I'm willing to sacrifice my time, my knowledge, right, my space to help support these folks. Then by that, you don't need to be tied to an organization to be courageous or to be right heading in the right direction in terms of social change and justice. Yeah. Thank you.
Glenda.
Angel.
Yes, ma'am.
You rock.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
It's so inspiring to
Thank you.
hear you. We've interacted together.
I'm not crying, my eyes are sweating. Thank you.
Thank
It means
you.
a lot to
Thank
me.
you for your courage, and thank you for your powerful message.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. A lot. And that means a tremendous amount coming from you. You are definitely one of my heroes and somebody that I absolutely admire. And just thank you for what you've done for this community, because it's more than events. They really have created a space for people to feel welcome and to know that they can be a part of that change. So that means a lot to me.
Got a question from the online.
Ooh, online.
Okay, so
Thanks, folks.
This question comes from Vicki. How do you process the disappointment of supporting someone who has taken advantage of your kindness, compassion, and courage?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Wow. Yeah. And, you know, speaking of courage, I think in some instances it takes courage to continue to support a process and where you've been wronged. And I'm again going to call it for what it is. I've been wronged by my vote so many times, right? And then I had to learn and take a step back and say, why? Why, after I put my faith in you as a leader, have I not experienced those things that you were telling me one day, right? And so one of the things that I've begun to do is remind myself there's a complexity to this, right? I remember a gentleman by the name of Barack Obama once upon a time, right? Defied odds to become, right, the first black president ever ever elected, excuse me. Well, nominated and elected, but ever elected. And so this is an individual who had the passion, the courage to create a lot of change. And yet he didn't have the support that he needed for that change to come to fruition. And despite the lack of support, still, right, created programs that, right, still offered a little bit of what he wanted to give. And so that's not to say that this individual was going to save us all. That's not what I mean to say. What I mean to say is that sometimes an individual's approach is limited by the circumstance that they're navigating, right? However, I've never accepted that as a pass for an individual not to stand up and do what they promised and said, right? Because at the end of the day, if your goal is to continue staying there, instead of maximizing the time that you have and be courageous to make some decisions that might not be popular but can shake up the status quo, then we need to find somebody who is, right? At the end of the day, that's the reality of it. And so we can be wronged by folks, but we can't give them our power and say, oh, I put my faith in you and you let me down, I'm just going to go ahead and give up. No. That's where we need to be courageous and, right, we need to pick ourselves up and keep moving forward, right? And I will say that I firmly believe that the leaders, the folks sitting in this room, are the leadership and representation that's needed, right, in those spaces. Because far too often, this system, right, systemic system of elections is also curved in a way that the voices that we need the most don't even stand a chance to get into that ballot box, like on the ballot for us to check their name on the ballot box, right? And that's just one example, and I'm using politics as an example because I feel like that's where we get shorted quite frequently. But I think it's really just taking an opportunity to say, what other aspects are at play here that would cause that individual to, right, act in such a way, but also what is that individual missing that didn't give them the will or courage to say that and to be honest and open about that, right? And to not be comfortable with, oh, I got to play the game, right? People aren't playing games out here. People are suffering. And so we can't be playing. You have to commit to what you commit to, and your courage has to hold you steadfast to that commitment, right? Not a re-election, but an opportunity to do something different than what was done before.
Hi, I'm Angela, and I'm not really sure how to ask this question. It's more of
Okay.
a topic than a question.
Okay.
But could you talk a little bit about, in your intro, you were talking about Dr. King and how he found the courage to love and honor, well, I wouldn't say honor, but love and somehow try to pray for or have forgiveness for people who wronged him. And I'm
Sure.
thinking of people who are, ICE and whoever else you want to kind of put in, like in the vitriol that's going on in the country and things like that. So, and I think a lot of us have family or know people in the community, live near folks who might have a very, very different idea about how things are going in this country than we do. And can you just talk a little bit about how to open ourselves up and maybe have some compassion or some understanding for people who are coming from a very different perspective and maybe a perspective that's causing a lot of pain and damage?
Yes, look, I'm happy to attempt to speak to it, and at the same time, just know that I have a lot of work to do in that space myself, right? Anger, for me right now, is at an all-time high, and seeing what I'm seeing. And again, it's that practice of trying to put yourself in somebody's shoes. Now, I've never said this out loud until right now. This is the first time I'll say this out loud. But I look at some of these ICE agents, right? And I'm angry, and in that anger, I find myself asking, who are you? What caused you to put that jacket on, right? Was it the history books that all come out of Texas, right? Was it that? Was it the fact that you were sitting at home one day struggling to feed your family and had no other means, and then you saw an ad that said, hey, come join ICE and make money. And then you went and did this thing that, right, whether you wanted to or not, you're doing it now because that's what's going to get you an opportunity to defeat somebody. Now, I don't know if that's anybody's reality, but that's where I choose to gravitate to, is that I don't know the story of every single one of those individuals, right? And forgiveness in itself is courageous, and forgiveness is hard, right? Forgiveness is hard. And it's going to take a long time for me to be able to forgive a lot of what's been done, right, to our communities. And yet I know that that's where I need to get to if I don't want that poison, right, weighing me down. If I don't want it to live in me, I know that I need to do that, if for nobody else, for myself, and for my children to have the best version of me in their lives, right? Because if I internalize every single aspect of that, and I'm not willing to show some type of, lack of a better term, grace, and I use that word loosely right now because of what we're seeing, right? But it really is that sense of compassion and empathy to say, what's caused you to be there, right? And so many people in their lives are walking around broken and don't even realize why, right? For the same reasons that for me, right? For some people, for the same reasons that for me as a young man, right? Didn't cry because I was supposed to be a man. And instead I internalized all that, and it popped in another unfortunate way. And so I try to remind myself, of that. And again, I try to remind myself that violence and hatred, no matter who directed at or how deserving I want to believe they are of it, is poisoning me just as much as it is poisoning them. And so at the end of the day, I won't give them that power. That's something I know I can hold for me. I can teach my children to love as opposed to retaliate. Yeah. Thank you for your question, Angela. Appreciate you. Thank you.
I think you just summed up the beloved community there.
Yes! Be a part of our beloved community. You already are.
Are there any other questions? That was a really good one. I don't know what time it is. I have no watch up here.
Somebody have to. Okay. I think we might be over. Are we over time?
I have no idea.
Well, look, I can hang out with you all night. I'm sure some of you might have other places to go and things to do. But look, reach out. Let's hang out, right? Let's have coffee. Let's talk. Tell me your story. You know, you got to hear some of mine. I want to hear yours. And that's what we need to do more frequently and more often with people who don't walk in our circles, who don't look like us, who don't talk like us, right? And go with an open mind and an open heart and go to learn, right? People that are different from me have changed my life in the most phenomenal and beautiful ways, and many of them are sitting in this room right now. One of my most wonderful and trusted friends who I love dearly, she hated me once upon a time. We didn't like each other. And now I can't even imagine my life without her, right? Because we got to know each other and we saw each other. Yeah. So enjoy the beauty of the diversity that we have here in Longmont. And if we can do that, then we truly have the hope of creating a beloved community. Or enriching a beloved community, because we already have one, right? And thank you so much all for being here tonight. We appreciate you. I hope you get a chance to come and listen to some of the other speakers, some amazing leaders on there. So I really hope you get a chance to listen to them too. And yeah, I hope you have a chance to continue these conversations amongst yourselves, with your families, with your friends. And I hope if nothing else, it gives you a little bit of hope to take with you. I know that seeing all of you here has filled me with hope, and I'm absolutely going to take that with me. And so I'm just really, truly grateful for you all, because whether you know it or not, your presence here is giving me a gift, and by extension, my children and anybody else that I have the privilege and opportunity of serving. So thank you so much. You're you're always going to be a part of me, you know, and I'm really truly grateful and appreciative. So, and thank you to you, Julie.
Thank you.